to this, the first hearing of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations in the 119th Congress. I look forward to working with all of you as we conduct oversight investigations to uncover and expose the truth on issues that are important to the American people. My hope is our work will be largely nonpartisan. And I use that word specifically, nonpartisan. There should be nothing partisan about revealing the truth. That was this subcommittee's experience in the last Congress under Chairman Blumenthal, as we conducted bipartisan investigations into the assassination attempts on President Trump and the Coast Guard's cover-up of sexual abuse, and attempted to obtain information the government has withheld from the 9/11 families. In addition to the subcommittee's bipartisan record, its reputation for conducting thorough investigations spans decades. Since the 1940s, this subcommittee has been the epicenter of major congressional oversight efforts. I hope to use the subcommittee to build on that legacy by bringing much-needed transparency to the public, revealing the truth, and exposing wrongdoing. But it won't be easy. Wrongdoers are very good at covering their tracks, and we are already aware of allegations suggesting document destruction and purposeful evasion of FOIA. Quick little aside, I do want to tell members that, and members of the audience, this is not going to be a standard U.S. Senate hearing. I think it'll start out that way, but I was here early enough on the subcommittee with Senator Levin, for example. And Senator Levin would come with binders like we have of over 2,000 documents, but that was just his binder for the hearing, and they'd go all day long. This is about thorough investigation to uncover the truth. So again, I'm going to encourage the members. We'll have timing on the first round of questions, but if it's apparent that you're interested in this, if it's apparent that you've listened to the testimony, read the testimony, and you have more probing questions, I'll allow time to do it. Now, it'll be at my discretion, but I'll be, I think, very generous to serious types of questions. Now, the title of today's hearing is "The Corruption of Science in Federal Health Agencies: How Health Officials Downplayed and Hid Myocarditis and Other Adverse Events Associated with the COVID-19 Vaccines." I also want to take a moment to apologize, particularly to the vaccine injured, because I know there was an awful lot of expectation that as soon as I obtained this chairmanship that we'd be holding hearings immediately in January and February, and that was what my hope was. It didn't pan out that way because as dedicated as Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is to radical transparency in HHS, that's hard to achieve. And so it still has been difficult to get the documents. I think we finally got enough documents to certainly demonstrate in this case with myocarditis that the federal government was well aware of it, downplayed the severity, and hid what they had actually found. So again, that's what this hearing is about. That's what about the report that we're issuing in conjunction with this hearing is about. As chairman of the full committee, I held multiple hearings in the first year of the pandemic that opened my eyes to the capture and corruption of federal health agencies and scientific research. So much of our miserably failed response to COVID made no sense. Masking, devastating shutdowns, the sabotage of early treatment, rapid approval of remdesivir, and the maniacal reliance on the COVID-19 injections. I use that word purposefully as well, injections, they're not standard vaccines, as the only way to end the pandemic. As ranking member of this subcommittee, I was unable to interest the subcommittee or full committee chairs in joining my oversight of our pandemic response. So instead of formal hearings, I held public events, giving those injured by the COVID-19 injection a platform to appeal to federal health officials and the public for help. I also provided opportunities for eminently qualified doctors and medical researchers who disagreed with our pandemic response to offer second opinions. More often than not, those who spoke up were vilified, censored, and suffered various forms of retribution and retaliation. Fortunately, the retaliation did not deter them, and they continued to speak out. Even better, they were joined by others. Some of those individuals are testifying today or are in the audience. I want to personally thank them for their courage and persistence. Today, I'm releasing an interim report that is based in large part on documents that were obtained by individuals who filed Freedom of Information FOIA requests over the last several years. These documents, obtained by reporters and private citizens, contain heavy redactions applied by the Biden administration. Yet, Despite these obstructive efforts, these individuals initially raised awareness of Biden's administration's failure to immediately warn the public about myocarditis and other serious adverse events linked to the COVID-19 injections. I want to today credit the tenacious reporting of Brenda Bellotti, Ed Berkovich, Brian Hooker, Amy Kelly, Zachary Stieber, and Naomi Wolf. I know this hearing in particular was based on what we saw in the Pfizer papers and the 17-page talking points memo we'll talk about later. And again, that was the good work of Naomi Wolf and Amy Kelly and their crowdsourcing of the Pfizer papers. You know, how do you go through millions of pages? But I also want to thank the individuals associated with React 19, the Informed Consent Action Network, ICAN, the book, The Pfizer Papers, as well as the reporters at Epoch Times, The Defender, Just the News, The Daily Clout, and many others who work persistently to expose the truth. Now, I actually have a quite a bit longer opening statement, which I'll ask to be entered in the record. But what I want to do right now is, in a more succinct fashion, go through a abbreviated timeline as it relates to the myocarditis issue. Now, after facing 4 years of the Biden administration's efforts to undermine the public's access to information in my oversight work, I immediately issued a subpoena to HHS when I became chairman of this committee. The subpoena records I am releasing today, which are discussed in the interim report, do not contain FOIA redactions and will finally provide the public a more complete understanding of the Biden administration's awareness of the risks of myocarditis following COVID-19 injection. So now here's a brief timeline. On February 28, 2021, Israeli health officials notified CDC, quote, of large reports of myocarditis, particularly in young people following the administration of the Pfizer vaccine. Again, that's February 28, 2021, 2.5 months after the emergency use authorization. On April 12, deaths worldwide within 30 days of injection, with 46% of those deaths occurring on day 0, 1, or 2 following injection. Now, I have the first chart I ever did on this, which I presented in our event in Milwaukee with the COVID injection injured. That chart, a couple months later, is showing, I think, 30-some%. I can't see it from that far away, but let me get out mine. That chart is showing, at that time, a couple months later, 4,812 deaths, 1,736, or 36% of those deaths occurring within the day of injection or within 1 or 2 days. Now, I was raising that issue. I was going on media. I was showing this chart, and I got censored. Radio talk show hosts, when I talked about this, they were deplatformed. Now, again, I realize VAERS doesn't prove causation. I realize it's grossly underreported. safety signal
From
in
May
invaders.
25th
Yes.
to May 27th, CDC officials
From May 25th
provide
to May 27th,
information on the
CDC
status
officials
of the
provide
to Pfizer
up-to-date
and
information. Three days following the myocarditis signal, FDA official Peter Marks appears to raise concerns about even posting the less formal clinical considerations on CDC's website. He emails Woodcock and Walensky, quote, "I need to ask for your patience with me. We still have concerns here if myocarditis and pericarditis have not actually signaled." That same day, CDC officials editing the clinical considerations discussed the need to, quote, "walk back," a sentence advising doctors to, quote, "consider restricting patients with myocarditis from rigorous activity like competitive sports for at least 3 months until cleared by healthcare professionals." And I'll be talking to Dr. McCullough about the danger of eliminating that warning, because 4 days later, CDC posts on its website clinical considerations about myocarditis, which omits any advice to doctors to advise patients with myocarditis to limit rigorous activity. That's what's in this report in far greater detail. So I would ask that that information, together with my majority staff report, 2,473 pages of records HHS has produced pursuant to my January 2025 subpoena, and my actual subpoena. I'd want those entered into the record. And with that, I'll turn over to Ranking Member Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for having this first hearing of our Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. I think we all agree that this hearing and our efforts in this subcommittee ought to be nonpartisan and non-political, and that we should depoliticize science, strictly adhere to the evidence, medical evidence, without resort to ideological predilection, and that there ought to be warnings about side effects from any medicine, and that the warning should be as prompt as possible. I think we can all agree on that fact, and that there ought to be very rigorous review of any kind of medical treatment by the FDA to make sure it's safe and effective before it's used in the public. But I want to take us back to January of 2021. I know it's hard to recall the sense of real fear during the worst of the pandemic. More than 20,000 Americans died from coronavirus each week. I remember seeing pictures of people who were in the hospital on gurneys because there was inadequate space for them in the hospital. The morgues overflowed, and we were looking to some way to stop the spread and the deep-seated pervasive fear. During the worst week of the pandemic, more than 25,000 Americans died. That was during the last week of President Trump's term of office. Not only were hospitals overwhelmed, but non-urgent procedures were postponed, and doctors and nurses were working around the clock, in fact, putting themselves at risk. Those healthcare providers, to this day, are among my heroes in this story as patients filled the hallways. As we talk about the side effects of COVID vaccines, I think we need to be clear about the most important fact. for all Americans. COVID-19 vaccines have saved millions and millions of lives. There is no scientific question about that fact. They save lives. In the past 5 years, more than 1.2 million Americans have lost their lives to COVID-19. That's 1.2 million parents, children, friends, and loved ones. And we all know someone who has perished as a result of COVID-19. But when the vaccines became widely available in 2021, deaths sharply declined, and many lives have been saved in the years since. Many in this room, speaking for myself as well as others, probably have been saved from this disease because of those vaccines. One study found that 3 million American deaths were averted. 18 million hospitalizations were avoided, and $1 trillion in healthcare costs were saved in the United States in just the first 2 years after COVID vaccines were distributed. I'd like this study entered into the record, Mr. Chairman, if there's no objection.
No objection.
Now, vaccines not only saved American lives, they enabled us to get back on our feet economically. They enabled the American economy to recover. Let's try to think of where we were 5 years ago with a deadly, unknown virus spreading through America and through the world. We were only able to come so far because of the vaccines and the researchers who developed them and the public health officials who distribute them. And now those individuals are again under attack, our public health officials. I've looked at those documents, maybe not all of them, that the majority alleges show that the Biden administration or those public health officials suppressed evidence of side effects. Let's be clear, the allegation is that they purposefully concealed evidence. I am unable to support that conclusion with this evidence. In fact, the primary piece of evidence for this claim is that the CDC did not issue a notice on its Health Alert Network, HAN, in May 2021, while it was still analyzing the evidence about myocarditis. We're talking about myocarditis. The chairman has referenced other side effects. I'm not sure what he means. But what I see as I look at that evidence is public health officials wrestling with what to do and what kind of warning to issue. And again, side effects must be studied and communicated. And that's what I see happening in these documents that the majority has released. So we have to distinguish, I think, between differences of opinion under the pressure of a pandemic and separate the opinions of scientists who are working for the greater good and, frankly, others who may simply be seeking to sow distrust while they profit off misinformation and fear. And I'm, frankly, deeply concerned about some of today's witnesses because they have a financial interest in fomenting distrust about COVID-19 vaccines and pushing untested alternative remedies over proven treatments. In fact, 2 of today's witnesses are executives at something called the Wellness Company, which sells the disproven treatment, ivermectin, and a host of untested supplements, which include something called, quote, unquote, Ultimate Spike Detox, costs $89.99 a bottle. Another makes money from suing vaccine companies, and still others are pushing unsupported research while rejecting the proven scientists on COVID and other vaccines. Let's be very clear that fear-mongering and rushing to conclusions without examining the evidence can lead to tremendous harm. And this risk is not just hypothetical or rhetorical. Misinformation about the safety of vaccines has led to a deadly outbreak of a preventable disease. We all know it, measles. Just 25 years ago, measles was declared eliminated in the United States. Since then, conspiracy theories, some financially motivated, have caused vaccination rates to plummet. Last September, the CDC warned that declining childhood vaccination could lead to a resurgence of a preventable disease like measles and rotavirus, exactly what is happening today. As of today, more than 1,000 Americans have been diagnosed with measles this year in 31 states, many of them children. So far, 3 have died. These deaths were preventable. They could have been avoided, but for the efforts of misinformation proponents that have spread lies and created fears. There has been so much misinformation and fear since COVID-19 emerged that during the height of the pandemic, healthcare workers and public health officials were often harassed and threatened. Some of them continue to fear for their lives. During the first frightening year of the pandemic, the Trump administration withheld critical information from the public, made baseless promises that the virus would magically disappear. I think I'm almost quoting the president. Magically disappear, engaged in unfounded conspiracy theories and sham science about COVID-19 treatments, and sowed the seeds of distrust in public health institutions. And then, to the tremendous credit of President Trump, he fast-tracked the vaccine. Let me repeat, to the credit of the Trump administration, the President of the United States fast-tracked the vaccine and saved lives. We need to learn from history. We're seeing the same pattern now. Those same seeds of doubt and distrust have been nurtured by the president's choices for key positions in this administration, including the decision to install a well-known vaccine skeptic as the head of HHS and to fill our public health agencies with conspiracists. And let's bring it right to the present day. Just yesterday, it was announced that the FDA may start restricting access to new COVID boosters to those over 65 or with a narrow set of pre-existing conditions. Now, we ought to be very frank here. Discerning what exactly this new guidance may be at the moment is confusing. And the troubling news leaves many questions unanswered about whether and how people can actually access vaccines if they want to do so. Will Americans who live with elderly or immunocompromised relatives, for example, have access to these vaccines? We don't know. And so far, those questions are unanswered. The manner and timing of this decision, frankly, reek of politics, not science. And again, science ought to be the lodestar. So I think we need to be looking at the present. We need to be looking forward. In the first 4 months since the president took office, he and his health secretary have fired at least 10,000 employees from public health agencies and cut more than $2.7 billion in funding for research, including $4.2 million for vaccine clinical trials. Let me repeat, clinical trials, money cut to do them. How does that make us safer? More than $3.8 million for safety monitoring, and more than $2 billion for state immunization programs, a drastic cut that is already hampering our measles response. These reckless cuts are undermining our ability to respond, not just to measles, but to what may come next. And we all know something will come next. That's the history. We need to learn from history and science. Let me just finish by saying the capacity of our agencies to warn is compromised by these cuts. The capacity of our agencies to do science and rely on science is compromised when we cut 10,000 people from the ranks of the agencies responsible for safety. And so I welcome the interest in this topic. I'm honored that the governor of Hawaii, Dr. Josh Green, has joined us today to share his experiences addressing both measles and COVID-19. He's not only a dedicated public service, but he's also a physician who led his experience, his state, Hawaii, during the pandemic. And I'm thankful to him for being here today. And I look forward to the testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. I think people understand why you didn't join me in my oversight request. There's over 70 letters that were not responded to. Again, I haven't uncovered yet what they were trying to hide, but our intention is to do so. You did mention the irrefutable fact that these injections save lives. I would enter into the record a recent study by Raphael Lataster, who does a pretty effective job of rebutting one of those studies from Watson et al. But put in the record, and again, will allow the public, the American people who are watching this hearing, decide based on what testimony is, based on what's been entered in the record, based on our report. It is the custom of this, the full committee and the subcommittee, to swear in witnesses. So if you all rise and raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you are about to give before the subcommittee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please be seated. Our first witness is Dr. Peter McCullough. Dr. McCullough is an internist, cardiologist, and epidemiologist from Dallas, Texas. He is broadly published with over 700 citations in the National Library of Medicine. He has testified multiple times in the U.S. Senate, U.S. House of Representatives, European Parliament, and many state capitals concerning public health policy. Dr. McCullough.
Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Blumenthal, subcommittee members, it's an honor to present my insights, my analysis, my clinical experience on this very important topic. The first time I testified at Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, before a word came out of my mouth, Minority Senator Gary Peters said, what America was about to hear was misinformation. I didn't even know what he was talking about. I had never heard that term before in academic medicine or in important deliberations. That's November 19th, 2020. What was he doing? He was using an old communist propaganda technique. He was attempting to gain leverage over me before a word ever came out of my mouth. We should never have our public servants ever try to gain leverage over anyone who is coming to Washington to help the nation on an important issue. As introduced, I'm an internist, I'm a cardiologist. I believe I'm the most published individual who's ever testified on matters related to COVID-19 in any of these hearings. I've seen and examined more patients. I've examined more data, and I'm one of the most published people on the topic in the world. And as a cardiologist, I can tell you, my role in this was to fight disease, preserve life, and above all, do no harm. Do no harm. Now, the topic today is myocarditis or heart damage from the COVID-19 vaccines. I'm a cardiologist. I know the topic well. I've examined thousands of patients with this problem, thousands. Before the pandemic, I had 2 patients ever with this problem. There's 1,065 papers in the peer-reviewed literature on COVID vaccine myocarditis. So let me summarize them for you. The first one that came on my radar screen that was alarming came from Washington University in St. Louis, August 18th of 2021. The first author is Verma and colleagues. New England Journal of Medicine. 42-year-old man comes into Washington University Hospital with vaccine myocarditis. The infection is ruled out. It's the vaccine. He's in the hospital. This is one of our best hospitals in the United States. He dies 3 days after taking Moderna. They can't save him in the hospital.
Say, Dr. McCullough, move the microphone just a little bit away from you.
Then one was reported from Korea by Choi and colleagues. This is now a younger man. Just a few days after Pfizer, he comes in the hospital. He dies within 8 hours of being in the hospital. I can tell you, I'm a cardiologist. That doesn't even happen with heart attacks. He dies within 8 hours. I examined all of the slides and the images that the Koreans had showed us. It looked like somebody took a blowtorch to that heart. It was so completely fried with inflammation. His heart was destroyed. These cases, which were widely known at the time, should have gotten everyone's attention. Everyone should have been laser focused on this. We should never have someone die after taking a vaccine. That's directly caused to the vaccine. Then Gill and colleagues, Connecticut, published in Archives of Pathology. 2 boys, aged 16 and 17, who die a few days after taking Pfizer. These are teenagers. They're found dead at home by their parents. They're absolutely horrified. They request an autopsy. They call in University of Michigan and University of Minnesota to look over what are they finding at autopsy. Conclusion, it's Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine myocarditis, unequivocal. These are autopsy-confirmed cases. So for all the mothers in the room, how would they feel if they found their children dead after taking a COVID-19 vaccine? This is in the peer-reviewed literature. This is not misinformation. Everyone should be paying attention to this. This is not conjecture. This is in the peer-reviewed literature. So we started to ask ourselves, what is going on? Turns out that Pfizer and Moderna and Janssen are the genetic code for the spike protein. The spike protein is the damaging part of the virus. The spike protein is loaded into the body and it causes tremendous damage in some. Acute myocarditis appears to have some genetic predilection, and all of the vials of the vaccine are not the same. But I can tell you, I'm concerned that until the vaccines are stopped, there will be cases of acute myocarditis. And to finish, we've had 216 vaccine deaths this year alone. So if the vaccine campaign continues, we have to look at what are we getting out of it now, 4.5 years of the campaign, and how many more people will die. I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. McCullough. Our next witness is Dr. Jordan Vaughn. Dr. Vaughn is a physician and clinical researcher in Birmingham, Alabama. As owner and CEO of MedHelp Clinics, Dr. Vaughn has directed his organization to the leading edge of early outpatient treatment of COVID-19 for his patients and greater Birmingham community. Dr. Vaughn has treated over 4,000 long COVID and COVID vaccine-injured patients. Dr. Vaughn.
Thank you. Chairman Johnson and Ranking Member Blumenthal, thank you for having me. I'm going to dovetail a little bit off what Dr. McCullough said. And one of the things that, as a clinician who also had about 200 people working for him and actually seeing about 170,000 patients a year, when COVID came along, I had to really figure out how to not only help my staff and make sure they're safe, but also help the patients that my organization was responsible for. And that really made me dive into understanding the pathology. And what I came away with was understanding that the spike protein, the S1 subunit specifically, is not a benign protein. It triggers inflammation, it disrupts endothelial barriers, it induces fibrin resistant to breakdown, and it promotes a lot of amyloid aggregates, which is what I research. These effects impair oxygen delivery, damage blood vessels, contribute to clotting pathologies that manifest with a lot of the symptoms that we're seeing in the long COVID and vaccine injured, which to this day is a huge amount of people. We're talking upwards of 10 to 15 million people in America that are being affected by the consequences of COVID in the long form or vaccine injury. And the typical symptoms are things like heart racing, brain fog, shortness of breath, and post-exertional malaise. In my clinic, I actually use immunofluorescent microscopy to be able to actually see what's going on in the blood and look for these amyloid aggregates. Some as young as teenagers that are unable to stand. Others are previously active adults suffering small strokes without typical identifiable causes. These are not abstract theories. They are the lived realities of my patients in Alabama and beyond. The mRNA injection, heralded as a solution, introduced a novel mechanism, lipid nanoparticles delivering modified mRNA that instructs the cells to produce a stabilized spike protein. Unlike traditional vaccines, this approach resulted in uncontrolled production of the spike protein for an unknown duration and distributes it widely across organs, including the heart, brain, and vasculature, and ovaries and testes. The actual EMA, their assessment of Comirnaty, which is Pfizer's vaccine, noted biodistribution beyond the injection site, contradicting claims that the vaccine stays in the arm. And a recent groundbreaking study using single-cell precision nanocarrier identification revealed LNP accumulation in the heart tissue of mice with adverse proteomic changes in immune and vascular proteins, raising concerns about the cardiac complications that dovetail with what we were seeing when we were looking at the COVID-19 vaccine myocarditis. I will tell my first encounter with a vaccine injury came in winter of 2021. 69-year-old man from Alabama presented with unexplained shortness of breath. He was a patient of mine. I really had no other reason that he had this shortness of breath. And after the second Pfizer dose, he actually had significant shortness of breath. I couldn't figure it out in a sense because it would typically be that he had a pulmonary embolism, but empirical anticoagulation and antiplatelet therapy brought rapid improvement. This case prompted deeper investigation that the spike protein's ability to induce fibrin that's resistant to breakdown, activate platelets irreversibly, and damage the inside of our vessels that run to every part of our body and every organ, explained his symptoms and those of thousands more since. I have treated approximately 4,000 patients suffering from long COVID and vaccine injury, or both. Many were young and previously healthy. For those with vaccine injury, trust in public institutions has been shattered. Many were coerced under the August 2021 federal mandates, despite legitimate hesitations due to prior infection or personal health risks. They knew their body better than the agencies. Now disabled, they are dismissed or ignored by the systems that mandated their compliance. The myocarditis signal was also a big thing. This spring of 2021, a clear safety signal emerged. Myocarditis in young males linked to mRNA vaccines. The Department of Defense confirmed cases of rare heart inflammation, and peer-reviewed studies later detected circulating spike protein in post-vaccine myocarditis cases. Autopsy findings have confirmed fatal vaccine-induced myocarditis, yet federal authorities accelerated licensing and mandates sidelining concerns. The CDC's hesitation to issue a health alert on myocarditis and the FDA's former CBER director promoting vaccines on social media crossed a line from oversight to advocacy. This was not regulation, it was endorsement. Informed consent is the foundation of a patient-physician relationship. Absent the regulators providing that information, that relationship is irreparably harmed, and the practice of medicine will continue to suffer. In closing, I urge you to stop blindly following the science. Science does not lead anywhere. It is an observer, measurer, and descriptor. It must inform leadership, not replace it. When leaders hide behind the science to justify policy, they abdicate responsibility. We need leadership that humbly engages with data, listens to patients, and actually acts with courage. Thank you. I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Vaughn. Next witness is Dr. James Thorpe. Dr. Thorpe is a board-certified obstetrician gynecologist and maternal fetal medicine specialist with over 44 years of clinical experience. As U.S. veteran and widely published physician, he has testified internationally, served as a journal peer reviewer, board member of the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, and examiner for the American Board of Obstetrics and Gynecology. Dr. Thorpe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My patients, I focus on the most vulnerable patients, pregnant women, and preborn. It is difficult to conceive of a more egregious breach of medical ethics by the government-controlled medical industrial complex than the promotion of COVID-19 vaccines to pregnant women, thereby, through transplacental transfer, effectively vaccinating their unborn and newborn children. This campaign was not accidental. It was calculated. Pregnant women were targeted deliberately for two reasons. First, women are the primary decision makers of healthcare across the human lifespan, a known marketing principle. Number two, pregnant women are the most vulnerable patients. If they could be convinced that the vaccine was safe and effective, it would imply that it was safe and effective for everyone. From the outset of the pandemic, this vaccine campaign was never grounded in biological science, but rather in behavioral science, specifically the manipulation of public perception through influence, fear, and persuasion. The federal government outsourced much of this psychological operations to NGOs which disseminated emotionally charged and misleading messaging. These entities falsely assured pregnant women that the vaccines were proven safe and essential for maternal and fetal newborn health, despite the fact that early evidence indicated quite the opposite. Pregnancy itself was protective against COVID-19 maternal mortality. Dr. Jay Winston, an initiative director at Harvard School of Public Health, described the government's vaccine marketing approach in a 2020 CBS News interview. He explained that the strategy was to, quote, go for the low-hanging fruit, those easiest to pick and harvest, end quote. And the fruit, in quotes, tragically, were pregnant women. Only this deception was institutionalized in the now infamous Shimabukuro study published on April 21st, 2021 in the digital version of the New England Journal of Medicine. 21 authors claimed the miscarriage rate was 12.6%, but the raw data revealed an 82% miscarriage rate in women vaccinated during the first trimester. This figure mirrors the effects of chemical abortion drugs such as RU-486. Also, in the same journal edition, on the same day, an op-ed appeared by CDC Director Rochelle Walensky and Journal Editor-in-Chief Eric Rubin. These publications were riddled with conflicts of interest and deliberate misrepresentations intended to coerce pregnant women into taking vaccines. Subsequent studies have also claimed that COVID-19 vaccines are safe and effective during pregnancy and have been rebuked by respected researchers. These publications are fundamentally compromised by serious conflicts of interest, ranging from biased funding sources and institutional mandates, and even threats to their medical licenses and board certifications. Between 2020 and 2022, pharmaceutical companies paid $1.06 billion to reviewers at leading medical journals, the New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, Lancet, and BMJ, thus corrupting the peer review process. At least 6 existing studies, 3 from CDC, FDA, and 2 from Pfizer, revealed major breaches in safety signals for COVID-19 vaccines and pregnancy. These findings were ignored. Conversely, countless independent researchers with no conflicts of interest published findings that contradicted the false narratives and the pharmaceutical industry narratives, only to be rewarded by persecution, censorship, and threats to their medical licenses and board certifications. This is not hypothetical. It happened to me. On February 8th, 2025, our team of researchers published a peer-reviewed study in Science, Public Health Policy, and the Law. We identified 37 adverse pregnancy outcomes significantly associated with COVID-19 vaccine, including miscarriage, stillbirth, birth defects, cervical insufficiency, premature rupture of membranes, preterm birth, and death of the newborn. Lin and colleagues in a major journal publication documented that the COVID-19 vaccine traverses the placenta, enters the fetal blood, and bioactively produces spike protein in the placenta and the lining of the uterus. Recently, animal studies revealed the mRNA COVID vaccine causes the destruction of 60% of the ovarian reserve in rats. This catastrophic public health failure was financed with taxpayer dollars and channeled through federal agencies to medical gatekeepers such as the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, ACOG, the American Board of Obstetrics and Gynecology, ABOG, and the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, SMFM. These organizations have abandoned their ethics and responsibilities to physicians and patients and must be held accountable. I urge the government to immediately halt all funding to these entities and to end every promotional campaign that coerces or recommends experimental mRNA therapies to pregnant women. This must stop now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thorpe. Our next witness is Dr. Joel Wallskogg. Dr. Wallskogg is an orthopedic surgeon originally from Wisconsin. He experienced an adverse event after his Moderna COVID-19 injection that he received on December 30th, 2020. He has subsequently been diagnosed with transverse myelitis, an unspecified autoimmune disorder, and autonomic dysfunction. He is medically retired. He is now co-chairman of REACT 19. Dr. Wallskogg.
Thank you, Senator Johnson, Senator Blumenthal, and the subcommittee for inviting me to testify on the development and safety of the COVID-19 vaccines. I am Joel Wallskogg, a board-certified orthopedic surgeon, now medically disabled after one dose of the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. Before the pandemic, I enjoyed a successful practice in Wisconsin, performing over 800 major surgeries annually. Trusting my health authorities, my practice followed CDC COVID-19 guidelines, delaying surgeries, and even temporarily closing. I proudly elected to get vaccinated, and within a week, I developed leg weakness, numbness, substantial balance loss, leading to falls, including one while treating a patient. Diagnosed with transverse myelitis, a spinal cord lesion at T8, T9, I was stunned that my providers dismissed any vaccine link, despite news of similar cases halting the AstraZeneca trial in the UK. 4 years later, while I can walk, I have been diagnosed with dysautonomia and an undefined autoimmune disorder, both debilitating conditions affecting multiple body systems. I remain medically retired. The career I loved and worked so hard for is now gone. In 2021, federal health agencies assured Americans that the COVID-19 vaccine trials were rigorous and closely monitored with rigorous post-marketing surveillance. They also claimed a robust safety net that would handle what they said were rare and mostly mild injuries with monitoring, follow-up, and financial aid. After my own vaccine injury, I learned the hard way that nothing could be farther from the truth. In my own battle to restore my health, I could not find a single reliable source of information from the CDC, from the FDA, or the NIH. Further, answers did not come from medical teams, the media, or even medical journals. Rather, the answers were being pieced together by tens of thousands of vaccine-injured patients, huddled together in social media-based support groups who are constantly fighting for their right to simply exist. You will hear today a great deal about myocarditis, maternal fetal complications, and blood clotting disorders after the COVID-19 shots. I hope to talk more about the neurological adverse events to the COVID vaccines. These are the most common adverse event to the COVID shots. I am now co-chair of REACT 19, which is a national, science-based, non-political, nonprofit that represents over 36,000 Americans seriously injured by the COVID-19 shots. Our mission is to provide financial, physical, and emotional support. This gives me a unique perspective to share the collective experience of those who have been harmed, not just by the COVID-19 vaccines themselves, but also by the US government. REACT 19 surveyed our 36,000 members, asking if the FDA takes vaccine injuries seriously. 100% said false. Not even one person voted favorably. The vaccine injured share a uniform story. We did our duty for our country, became injured, disabled, or died. We further reported to VAERS and VSafe, repeatedly contacted our elected officials and applied to the Countermeasures Injury Compensation Program, or CICP, only to face silence from the VAERS, no response from VSafe, ghosting by our own representatives, and a 98% rejection rate from the CICP. The many cries for help were ignored. Some were studied at the NIH in a program under Dr. Fauci, where they were diagnosed with vaccine complications, but never disclosed to the public, despite promises that the NIH would do so. Privately, the agencies said neurological conditions needed early recognition and treatment, while publicly they remained silent and often denying that they were even treating vaccine injuries. Rather, they promoted boosters and high safety claims, while the White House directed social media to censor, quote, true stories of vaccine injury, end quote. Relegating NIH confirmed injuries into silence. That silence by health authorities, elected representatives, and even our White House has resulted in even more severe health outcomes and worse for many, death. The PrEP Act shields drug companies from injury liability and strips Americans of their constitutional right to due process and jury trial. This liability shield places the responsibility squarely on the U.S. government to address this crisis. Our constitutional rights must be replaced with effective safety monitoring and compensation. Today, these programs are dismal failures. Congress must urgently reform these failing systems or remove itself as a middleman and repeal the PrEP Act. An analysis of clinical trial data showed that for every 800 people vaccinated, one suffers a serious adverse event. We are here today to end the silence for the 1 in 800. It is time to stop politicizing vaccine injuries and start building meaningful recognition, research, competent care, and fair and just compensation. At React 19, we say we've had negative reactions, but we're about seeking positive actions. I will not stop until these humanitarian goals are met. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wallskogg. Our next witness is Mr. Aaron Siri. Ms. Siri is the managing partner of Siri and Glimstad with over 85 professionals. He has handled numerous high-profile cases involving challenges to medical mandates, restoring exemptions, agency transparency, including forcing FDA to release the COVID-19 vaccine licensure documents, and deposing immunologists, infectious disease doctors, and vaccinologists. Mr. Siri.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Our vaccine practice, I believe, which has over 40 professionals, it doesn't represent pharmaceutical companies, I believe is the largest vaccine practice in the world. When we litigate vaccine cases, we cannot rely on credentials or fancy titles. We have to prove our claims with high-impact data and sources. For example, I saw a slide put up that showed 3 million lives were saved from COVID-19 vaccines. The citation to it was to the Commonwealth Fund. If you follow that, that's not a peer-reviewed study. That's a blog. It's a blog that used a mathematical model to calculate that 3 million lives were saved. So I agree with the Senator Blumenthal who said, quote, claims made, I think you meant regarding vaccines, we need to examine the evidence. And that's an example of that. We need to look carefully at the evidence we are relying upon when we are making claims about vaccines. I don't think that if I went into court and I was relying on a blog that used a mathematical model, I would be laughed out of court if I was making those claims about vaccines. But unfortunately, when it comes to promoting vaccines, well, that's what we often see. The underlying data is not typically really carefully evaluated. Claims about what vaccines do when they're positive, because our health agencies are responsible for promoting them, easily made. Claims that vaccines cause any harms or injuries often get ignored no matter how good the underlying data. I also heard that deaths sharply declined in 2021. Well, when you look at all-cause mortality in the United States, deaths in 2021 went up compared to 2020, and presumably most of the most frail, the weak among us died in 2020 from COVID. We should have had a reduction in all-cause mortality in the United States. We did not. And those numbers you can't argue with. They're binary. You're either dead or you're alive. You can argue whether the vaccine killed you or didn't kill you, whether COVID killed you or didn't kill you. But it can't argue with all-cause mortality. And we did not have a reduction in all-cause mortality in 2021. We had an increase. And we really need to answer that question. We have sent many letters to our federal health officials trying to get an answer to that. With that said, not only do we need to carefully study the data and science before we go and litigate our vaccine cases, because again, I don't have a MD or a PhD or an MPH, we also need to understand the economic and regulatory framework around vaccines. And COVID-19 vaccines did not just fall into a vacuum. They fell into a very well-developed regulatory and economic framework for vaccines that has developed over the last 40 years. For every product on the market, you can sue the manufacturer for harm, for design defect claims, meaning the claim that the product could have made safer. I mean, literally, look around this room, planes, cars, pharmaceutical drugs, every one. There's only one product in America. You cannot sue the manufacturer for design defect claim to claim that it could have been made safer, and that are vaccines. I heard, injections, vaccines. My definition of vaccine is any product for which the government needs to give it immunity from harms. To me, that's what a vaccine is, because some prevent infection, some don't. That's what a vaccine is, meaning it can't survive without that immunity, apparently. Why did vaccines get this immunity, which was provided in 1986 under the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act? Because leading up to 86, there were only 3 routine childhood vaccines, MMR, OPV, and DTP, and they were causing so much harm and causing so much liability that all the manufacturers were going out of business to stop making them. And Congress, instead of forcing those manufacturers to do what every other product manufacturer needs to do in that situation, which is what? Make a better, safer product. Instead said, you know what? We're just going to give you immunity. We're going to make it so nobody can sue you for those harms. And you can keep selling your product to the American public no matter how many children it kills or injures. And the issue is that immunity was not just given for those 3 products. It was given for any childhood vaccine, routine child vaccine that was developed thereafter. I tell you this not to take issue with childhood vaccines, but to explain to you the regulatory framework in which vaccines have developed over the last 40 years. We have now gone from 3 injections in the first year of life under the CDC Schedule in 86 to 29 injections, including in utero, if a child follows the CDC schedule today. Every one of those vaccines, save one, was developed by a pharmaceutical company knowing they would not be responsible for the injuries that are caused by those products. So when you have drug trials where pharmaceutical companies, they care about losing money, they don't want to lose money on their drugs, they often do multi-year placebo-controlled trials before they get on the market because they don't want to end up upside down. They're there to make money. But with vaccine products, because they don't have that financial incentive, they have the disincentive. Almost every childhood vaccine in this country is licensed based on clinical trials with no placebo control, save for COVID-19 vaccine, often days or weeks, up to maybe 6 months of safety review after injection, and are often extremely underpowered. Those trials could never have really confirmed the safety of this product, and my submission to this committee laid out every single vaccine and put them in detail. I will, since I'm running out of time, I'll just wrap up by saying this. You might say, well, okay, the pharmaceutical companies did that, but why would the FDA allow it? It's because, unfortunately, our federal health authorities are hopelessly conflicted. Congress gave them conflicting structural duties. They're responsible for promoting vaccines and for defending them in the Vaccine Compensation Program. And you also ask them to be responsible for safety. Those conflict. One has overtaken the other. And for the most part, based on our over 2,004 requests to federal health agencies over the years on behalf of our client, ICAN, I could tell you, our federal health agencies act like partners with pharma. They encourage their inroads. They act basically in the shoes of pharma because when the immunity to liability was given to the pharmaceutical companies, Congress recognized that apparently and transferred all the safety functions to HHS and the mandate for safer childhood vaccines. And by doing so, it's made them hopelessly conflicted. That was a very, very quick way to try and convey the regulatory and economic framework into which COVID-19 vaccines fell into, and why, from the pharmaceutical and FDA's perspective, the COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials may have been robust, and they were compared to childhood vaccines, but compared to drugs or anybody that actually wants to assess safety, they absolutely were not robust. They were incredibly anemic. And as for post-licensure, regulators didn't do their jobs, but really they acted like pharmaceutical companies seeking to cover up harms and avoid reputational damage and financial liability. I hope this hearing can help begin the process of changing that. Thank you, and I apologize for going over on my time.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Siri. Our final witness is Governor and Doctor. I've always found senators like to be called doctor, if they are one. So Governor and Dr. Josh Green. Governor Green is the 9th governor of Hawaii. He earned his degrees in biology and anthropology from Swarthmore College and an MD from Penn State's College of Medicine. Dr. Green served 2 terms in the Hawaii House of Representatives, 3 terms in the Hawaii State Senate, and a term as lieutenant governor, during which he was the state's point person addressing the COVID pandemic. Dr. Green was elected governor in December 2022. Governor Green.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. Thank you so much for welcoming me. Thank you, Ranking Member Blumenthal. Thank you, Senators. First of all, I'm coming to you as a physician. When I speak as a doctor, I'm here to say that vaccines save lives, period. I care about saving lives. You care about saving lives. Everyone in this room, I believe, cares about saving lives. But I've seen firsthand children dying from the spread of preventable diseases because of vaccine skepticism, because people lose faith. I've seen the lives of some children in one house who are vaccinated live, while children in the house next door who have not been vaccinated die. And we saw a lot of this during COVID. I want to tell you a little bit about my COVID experience as the COVID liaison in my state, a state of 1.4 million people. And let me preface this by saying we worked very closely with President Trump and his team. And then subsequently, as Lieutenant Governor, I was able to work very closely with President Biden and his team, and I appreciate them both. I appreciate that President Trump, using Operation Warp Speed, got us a vaccination in an extraordinary time. We were desperate as healthcare providers. I worked as an emergency room physician virtually every single weekend for 20 plus years, including through the whole pandemic. And this is what I saw. I saw people dying of terrible disease when they caught the Delta variant of COVID especially. I saw people recover better when they had been vaccinated. In Hawaii, we had the lowest mortality rate in the country. We had the highest vaccination rate in the country. People have asked me in the course of the prep for this hearing, well, is Hawaii safer because it's a tropical island state? No, actually, it's quite the contrary. We had COVID coming from east in Asia, where it originated, and west, travelers from the mainland. But we put together programs based on science. Day by day, I counted case after case after case because there was so much uncertainty. And I was able to share in our state where we had infectious disease doctors, where we had extra need for ventilators, where we had extra need for vaccinations, where the rates were lower. And day by day, working with all the healthcare providers in my state and listening to others, not mandating. I'm not a mandate guy. That may come as a surprise to some today. We were able to make sure that we had a science-based response. We put together a safe travels program which tested anyone coming into the islands so that they wouldn't travel or that they would isolate or quarantine if they were positive so they wouldn't spread the disease. And over time, we had the experience that no one else had. We saw death rates constantly lower than all the other states with the single exception of Vermont on occasion. I tell you this because we have to follow science, and I truly believe that we can't politicize science or vaccinations or any of these public health matters, and it's very important going forward. This is where we should unite with one another. We should heal our country together in this space. Now, another experience I had, measles. I was the doctor that was asked to go to Samoa when they had their outbreak of measles. Why did they have their outbreak? Because they lost faith in the vaccination program, and it was tragic. The Children's Health Defense went there, and they scared people. After tragedy, admittedly, it should have never happened. I had children die in my arms who were not vaccinated but died of measles. This beautiful boy was with me and a pediatrician. Dr. Nadine Tansala had a terrible case of the measles, and some of his relatives passed away from the disease. But we went there and we vaccinated 37,000 individuals in 48 hours, and the measles just stopped. And I say this because this is what we have to look forward to in the future. if we somehow fall into a place where we don't believe in vaccinations any longer. And we shouldn't do it blindly. We should study them. We should check for safety. Absolutely, that is essential in science. But these vaccinations save lives. They saved many lives during COVID. In my state, they saved over 10,000 lives. We anticipated mass casualties, which we never saw because we fought this disease with great intelligence and great acumen. I will tell you this. There are lots of things to share today. Protests resonated through the COVID experience in my state. People protested at my home, around my family. But the leader of the protests ultimately, after I was worried that he would catch COVID, did exactly that. Ended up in grave, grave peril. His wife was in the intensive care unit. His name was Witkoff. He later disavowed the protests against the vaccinations after seeing individual after individual after individual be intubated and go into the ICU because he experienced it. And that's what we as physicians see too often. Once a tragedy occurs, and my heart is with everyone who had any kind of reaction to the vaccines that we're talking about or loses a loved one. Of course, we love our fellow mankind, but we cannot turn away from science. So these are some of the things I wanted to share with you today. Ultimately, we have to decide whether we're going to be committed to public health in our country. And right now, we are in great peril. It is absolutely my firm belief that vaccines have saved millions of lives over the last 50 years, 150 million by many people's accounts. It's decreased infant mortality by 40% globally. And we have to continue to commit ourselves in this way. So I'm concerned. I'm concerned that as we end up in a politicized discussion, that we will move away from science. We will not trust one another, experts. We will not trust one another, and we will end up in conflict. So what I would say is this. Let's work together. Let's find a way to actually find the common ground to protect our children. Let's find a way to make sure our public health system remains intact, not taken apart by the current approach where HHS is jettisoning many of its people, many of the billions of dollars, perhaps many of the vaccinations. This is our opportunity to come together, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this as the hearing goes on, but I'll say one last time. Vaccines save lives. I've given vaccines. I've taken vaccines. I've treated people that didn't get vaccines, and it's broken my heart when they've passed away.
Thank you, Governor Green. Quick comment. I'm not aware anybody on my side of this issue has politicized it. The accusation is always that we're not. You did state, by the way, 10,000 lives saved in Hawaii. I would love to have your citation on that. So if you can give us a study so we can put that in the record. And any other citation, give us on the millions of lives saved by vaccines as well. I mean, I want to know the truth. Just real quick, I've got a couple other charts I want to put up there. This is a chart, a lot of people produced it.
Chairman, if I could just interrupt for 10 seconds over here.
Sure.
Is today's, just a point of order, are we talking about vaccines or are we talking about the COVID vaccine?
Well, specifically, we were talking about the hiding of the safety signal on myocarditis.
So we're not talking about all vaccines?
We can talk about anything you want to.
Okay.
I mean, again, it has obviously opened up because we're also talking about the corruption of science. And I think science has been corrupted. So fair game. So, and again, I appreciate you staying here and stick around and ask a lot of questions. I think you'll learn an awful lot. Put my time back on the clock. No, I'll take whatever I want. This is a chart. This is a chart. Again, I was looking at the VAERS. You know, I had been.
Mr. Chairman, that's not the way I ran this subcommittee.
I had been, well, this is a different, again, I'll be very generous, okay? I was actually instructed as a non-doctor what the COVID injections were. Encapsulated in lipid nanoparticle that was designed to permeate difficult to permeate barriers. So they lied to us when they said they'd stay in the arm. They knew it wouldn't. They had a study, the Japanese regulators uncovered that when they did do a biodistribution study in rats, it distributed all over the body. So that was the first lie. Didn't really talk about too much about the toxicity yet of the lipid nanoparticle, but it goes all over the body. So I was aware, and again, that this was not a standard vaccine. This isn't a attenuated or dead virus that the body reacts to. This actually hijacks the cell, has the cell produce the spike protein, which is toxic to the body, which means the body attacks it. Again, I'm a layman, but it's pretty simple for me to understand this. So I was aware of this like in October. So I'm watching VAERS, and so I'm publishing these charts, and I'm being censored. I see the next chart, chart number 2. This is the full history of VAERS and the number of deaths being reported associated with the vaccine. You got a couple hundred a year until 2021, and yikes, 21,725 deaths worldwide. Why? And everybody's saying, no, this is safe and effective. The vaccine injured were being gaslit. They weren't being treated. They're still being gaslit. There is no, by the way, there is no compassion, Governor. I could fill this room with photos of people who are dead because of the COVID injection. I could fill the room. And that is being denied. That is being denied. It is being denied, and these people haven't been able to get help. I held an event in Milwaukee in June 2019 and 2021, and all the vaccine injured, those women, all they wanted was to be seen and heard and believed, and they are not to this day. Okay? So again, they're not the ones politicizing. They just want to be helped. They want compassionate doctors to treat them, to recognize what caused their illness, not gaslight them, not deny that it exists. But anyway, so you take a look at this chart, and they're still denying that this, nothing to see here. This is safe and this is effective. Okay? Next chart. This is the current VAERS chart. 38,607 deaths reported worldwide associated with the COVID injection. And we know VAERS dramatically understates, by a factor of 10, 100? We know it understates it. 9,228 of those deaths are occurring on the day of vaccination in the 1 or 2 days. Okay, I know VAERS doesn't prove causation, but man, that's a correlation we should have been looking at, but they ignored and they censored. But enough of that. Dr. McCullough, please, in my layman's terms, I just kind of laid out the harmful mechanisms of this injection. Can you and Dr. Vaughn, because I think you've both spoken to this, again, in layman's terms, talk about why this caused so much harm in so many different ways because of the biodistribution. Dr. McCullough.
80% of Americans took a vaccine. 20% didn't. 20% did not take a vaccine. The vaccine was never safe enough for me to take. Messenger RNA, devised by Pfizer and Moderna, has been chemically modified to be unassailable to enzymes in the body to be broken down. The messenger RNA is found in the human heart of people who die after the vaccine. It's found in the brain. The spike protein is found everywhere in the body. 3 studies now show the spike protein is circulating in the blood for 6 to 9 months after people take the shot. This part of the virus, the lethal part of the virus, in the vaccinated, it's circulating in the blood. And then they take a booster, they get more circulating in the blood. It is a killer protein. It cannot be safe. It was not safe by design. Safety trumps efficacy. We cannot tolerate false drug claims. And we saw a poster behind Senator Blumenthal making a false drug claim that vaccines saved millions of lives, specifically the COVID vaccine. Well, let's take a look at that. When someone signs consent for a vaccine, Senator Blumenthal, does the consent form say it's going to save their lives? Of course it doesn't. It's not on the FAQ. There's never been a prospective, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial ever showing that COVID-19 vaccines reduce mortality or hospitalization. There's not even a valid non-randomized study. Thankfully, COVID mortality went down for 3 reasons. Because we all got the infection, vaccinated and unvaccinated, so we developed population natural immunity. We developed early treatment. Credit to Operation Warp Speed. We used all the Operation Warp Speed tools, additional drugs. We treated patients with multi-drug protocols at home so they don't go to the ER. So Governor Green never saw the patients we treated because they were successfully treated at home. And the third reason is that the virus mutated to a much milder form. Those things happen concurrently with rollout of the vaccine. The vaccine cannot be falsely credited with saving millions of lives. We can't allow false drug advertising to be put up on a poster behind one of our public servants. We cannot accept that.
So let me quick. And I will have a lot more. I will have a lot more questions. Put up my last that optional chart number 4 here, because I think this is something I developed, September 2021. And this shows the number of daily cases of COVID. And you see it's peaking in January. Right as we're rolling out the vaccine, but we really haven't injected it with anybody. If by the time we had any kind of significant uptake of the vaccines, we were way down in terms of the number of daily cases. I mean, this virus was burning itself out. Okay, now we had different variants. Again, I've read a lot of information about vaccination into the midst of a pandemic driving variants. Is that what happened? I don't know. But you would think if a vaccine were that effective, the tail would just continue and the pandemic would be over. But that's not what happened. We had a whole new surge, and this is Delta, and doctors I've talked to, a very deadly, probably a more deadly. Would you agree with that, Dr. McCullough? Delta was a more deadly. I know you guys are kind of freaking out that your early treatment wasn't working as well.
It was definitely more difficult to treat. But fortunately, by that time, we had treatments.
But anyway, I just wanted to put this thing up here. Again, to a layman, if the vaccine really worked, was that efficacious, prevent all that disease? By the way, they all admitted that it didn't prevent transmission. They lied to us about that for 4 months, maybe a year. Then they finally had to admit it didn't prevent transmission. But again, this chart right here just shows you that if the vaccine really would have worked, you wouldn't have had this. You wouldn't have had this. But I'll turn it over to Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and I think we'll try to certainly stay within our 7 minutes so our colleagues can have their day of questioning.
But again, we'll have second, third, fourth rounds. I mean,
Thank you.
we'll use up the time of this hearing room.
The debate here seems to be about the efficacy of COVID-19. But the central issue that brings us here today is the allegation that there was purposeful concealment of knowledge and evidence. And I just want to make the point, I may be sounding a little bit like a lawyer, not a physician, but purposeful concealment, intentional hiding is essentially undocumented by the evidence released by this report itself. In fact, the documents released by the majority today show that public health officials took multiple steps in the spring of 2021 to make healthcare providers aware of those rare reports of myocarditis among vaccine recipients. On May 14th, almost 2 weeks before the CDC decided to issue clinical considerations rather than a HAN on myocarditis, which is, by the way, the primary piece of evidence that the majority cites in this so-called cover-up. The CDC's National Center of Immunization and Respiratory Disease sent an email to state and local health departments around the country entitled, quote, "Monitoring Reports of Myocarditis," end quote. The email noted risks and contained a reminder that providers were obligated to report cases. 5 days later, they sent out a follow-up email urging recipients to let providers in their region know of risks and reminding them once again of the obligation to report cases. I have 2 emails here that are in the majority report. They're available to the public. I ask that they be made a part of the record, Mr. Chairman.
Objection?
I'm not going to read them. They're for everyone to see. One begins with, "I would like to flag a message we sent out late Friday night. I encourage you to forward this important message about vaccine safety and reporting," and it goes on. Warnings. Far from a cover-up, these public health officials were trying to alert scientists, doctors, the public about the potential side effects. Mr. Siri and I are both trial lawyers, and issuing that kind of warning is far from evidence of trying to hide or conceal something. You can say they were wrong somehow, but intentional cover-up is not within the realm of the plausible allegations here. So I think we need to be really clear and careful when we start discrediting scientists or public health officials. I'd like to ask Governor Green, can you tell us how, as a physician, publicly funded research, which is being cut by this administration, is important to establish not only new vaccines, but also the safety and efficacy of ongoing use of vaccines?
Thank you, Senator. So, as governors, we rely on funding to do so many things from the federal government, and cuts to research will be devastating. You can't just simply pause research and wait until a different ideology resumes governing, or until we get through these hearings and we restart critical research projects. We will lose ground on this science and the science that benefits from it, the R&D that goes forward. We've all been very supportive for decades of advanced scientific research